The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of representatives from different species sat in their designated pods, floating around the central holographic display. The year was 4587, and for the first time in decades, something truly remarkable had been discovered. James Wilson sat quietly in the human delegation's pod, watching as Admiral Reed of the Council Exploration Fleet presented his findings. The hologram showed a massive fleet of ships, dark and dormant, floating in the void at the edge of known space. As you can see, Admiral Reed's voice boomed through the chamber. We have discovered approximately 3,000 vessels of unknown origin. The hologram zoomed in on one of the ships. It was huge, nearly 4 kilometers long, with thick armor plating and what appeared to be conventional thrusters. A ripple of laughter spread through the chamber. Representative Green, the blue-skinned leader of the Advanced Species Alliance, spoke up first. Are those nuclear fusion engines? More laughter followed. And is that mechanical armor plating? Not even basic energy shielding. James leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the design of the ships. Something about them seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. The council members continued their amused analysis. Look at those weapon mounts, another representative chuckled. They appear to be designed for physical projectiles. Imagine that, a spacefaring civilization using bullets in space. The chamber erupted in more laughter. Admiral Reed raised his hands for silence. While the technology appears primitive by our standards, the scale of this fleet is unprecedented. Our scans indicate these ships have been here for at least 2,000 years, yet their hulls show minimal degradation. This caught James's attention. 2,000 years. He quickly did the math in his head. His eyes widened as realization struck, but he remained silent. The engineering, while crude, shows remarkable durability. Reed continued. We've detected multiple redundant systems, and despite their age, many of the ships appear to be in salvageable condition. The Council will need to decide what to do with this discovery. Representative Green waved his hand dismissively. What use could we possibly have for such outdated technology? Our smallest modern patrol ships could outmaneuver and outgun these relics. I suggest we salvage them for raw materials. That was when James finally stood up. The movement drew all eyes to the human pod. Humans were known for staying quiet during most council meetings. I would advise against that, he said calmly. Oh, Green's tone was condescending. Does the human representative have some special insight into these primitive vessels? James nodded, his face serious. I do, actually. He touched a control panel, and a hologram zoomed in on a particular section of one of the ships. Would anyone care to explain what that symbol represents? The chamber fell silent as the image enhanced. There, partly worn by time but still visible on the hull, was a familiar symbol, the United Nations Space Command Emblem, circa 2345. These ships, James continued, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, were built by humans during what we call the Preparation Era. They were constructed as a defense fleet against a threat that our ancestors believed would come, though it never did. The laughter had completely died now. Everyone knew that humans, while relatively new to the Council, had a reputation for military engineering that had earned them respect, even if their methods were often considered unconventional. Representative Green cleared his throat. But surely, Ambassador Wilson, you would agree that these ships are hopelessly outdated compared to modern vessels. James smiled slightly. Perhaps, or perhaps our ancestors understood something we've forgotten, that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most reliable. These ships were built to last millennia, and they have. They were built to fight an enemy we knew nothing about, so they were designed to be adaptable. And most importantly, he paused, looking around the chamber, they were built at a time when humanity couldn't rely on fancy energy shields or quantum drives. We had to make do with what we had. And what we had, we made to last. The chamber remained quiet as the implications sank in. The human fleet might look primitive, but it had survived where other civilizations, advanced ships, had long since crumbled to dust. And now, everyone wondered, what other secrets might these ancient vessels hold? 3 months after the discovery of the ancient human fleet, the Galactic Council faced their worst nightmare. James sat in his usual pod, but this time there was no laughter in the chamber. Instead, terror filled the room as they watched the live feeds from the outer colonies. The massive screens showed scenes of destruction. The Council's most advanced warships, pride of their modern fleet, were being torn apart by strange, dark ships that seemed to absorb every energy weapon fired at them. These ships moved like a swarm of angry insects, and that's what the Council started calling them, the Swarm. "We've lost contact with the Beta Sector," Admiral Reed reported, his voice shaking. His usually neat uniform was wrinkled, and dark circles showed under his eyes. "That's the 4th sector this week. Our best ships, our most powerful weapons. Nothing works against them." The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other, demanding answers, requesting emergency evacuations, or calling for their sectors to be protected first. Silence. Representative Green's voice cut through the noise. The once proud alien looked shaken, his blue skin pale with fear. "Admiral Reed, explain how this is possible. Our ships carry the most advanced weapons in known space." Reed brought up a tactical display. "The Swarm's shields, if we can call them that, simply absorb our energy weapons. Plasma cannons, laser arrays, quantum disruptors. Nothing gets through. It's like they were built specifically to counter every advanced weapon we have." James watched the tactical display carefully. Something about the Swarm's movement patterns seemed familiar. They avoided direct confrontation with larger groups of ships, preferring to isolate and overwhelm targets one by one. It was an old hunting strategy, one that humans had studied in nature for thousands of years. "What about physical weapons?" James asked suddenly. The chamber grew quiet. "Has anyone tried using kinetic weapons against them?" Admiral Reed shook his head. "No modern military vessel carries physical weapons anymore. They're too primitive." The word caught in his throat, remembering how they had laughed at the ancient human fleet just months ago. James stood up. "I have an idea," he said, "but you're not going to like it. We're losing entire sectors." Green snapped. "We'll take any idea at this point." James activated the main display, showing the ancient human fleet they had discovered. "These ships," he explained, "carry what we would now consider primitive weapons. Rail guns, missile pods, nuclear warheads. No energy weapons." "You can't be serious," someone shouted. "Those relics against the Swarm." "Think about it," James continued. "The Swarm's defenses are perfect against energy weapons because that's what everyone uses. But when was the last time they faced simple kinetic weapons? A solid slug of metal moving at relativistic speeds, or a nuclear warhead that releases its energy not as a beam, but as a sphere of pure destruction." The chamber grew quiet as understanding dawned. The Swarm's seemingly perfect defenses might be useless against weapons so old that no one used them anymore. "Even if you're right," Admiral Reed said, "those ships are ancient. We don't even know if they still work." "They were built to last," James replied. "And more importantly, they were built by humans who knew they might need to start these ships up again after centuries of dormancy. We built in redundancies, backup systems for backup systems. Everything mechanical where possible, because mechanical parts can be fixed. Everything simple, because simple things break less." Representative Green stood up. "How long would it take to check if they're operational?" "Give me 3 days with a technical team," James said. "If I'm wrong, we've lost nothing but time. If I'm right." He let the sentence hang. The council voted immediately. For the first time in its history, the vote was unanimous. As James prepared to leave for the ancient fleet's location, he heard Green's voice behind him. "Ambassador," the alien said quietly, "no one's laughing at your ancestors' engineering anymore. James nodded but didn't smile. They had work to do, and somewhere out in space, the swarm was getting closer. The next few days would determine whether humanity's foresight 2,000 years ago would save the galaxy today. The ancient fleet loomed before them, massive ships floating silently in the darkness of space. James stood on the bridge of his research vessel, accompanied by a team of the Council's best engineers. Among them was Dr. Robert, a specialist in ancient technology, who couldn't hide his excitement despite the grave situation. "Look at this craftsmanship," Robert said, running his scanner over the hull of the command ship. They had docked with the massive vessel an hour ago. "The metal alloys are incredible. We don't even make materials this durable anymore." James led the team through the dark corridors, their lights illuminating the way. The ship's interior was cold and quiet, but not dead. Somewhere deep inside, systems still hummed faintly, waiting to be awakened. "Here," James said, stopping at a heavy door marked Command Archives. "This is what we need." He placed his hand on the scanner beside the door. To everyone's surprise, it lit up, reading his DNA pattern. "How is that still working?" one of the engineers asked in amazement. "Mechanical storage systems," Robert answered, studying the door mechanism. "No quantum data crystals or neural networks to degrade. Just simple, reliable machinery." The door opened with a hiss of preserved air. Inside, they found rows of physical data storage units, hard drives, and solid-state devices protected in vacuum-sealed containers. "Our ancestors weren't fools," James explained, moving to a central console. "They knew digital data could be corrupted over time, so they stored everything in multiple formats, including physical blueprints." He pressed a button, and to everyone's surprise, the room hummed to life. A hologram appeared, showing an old recording. A military commander from the past appeared before them, speaking clearly. "If you're watching this, you've found our fleet. We built these ships because we knew something was coming. We didn't know what, but we knew we had to be ready." The team watched in silence as the recording continued, explaining the fleet's capabilities. The ships carried massive rail guns that could fire metal slugs at near-light speed. They had missile bays loaded with both conventional and nuclear warheads. Their armor was meters thick, designed to take hits that would vaporize modern vessels. "Why was this fleet abandoned?" Robert asked, looking through the technical specifications. James sighed. "Politics. When better technology came along, energy weapons, quantum drives, shield systems, people thought these ships were obsolete. They wanted to scrap them, but a group of admirals fought to preserve them instead. They mothballed the fleet, hiding it out here with a skeleton crew of maintenance robots." Speaking of robots, one engineer called out, pointing to a corner. A maintenance robot sat there, dormant but intact. Its design was simple. No AI, no quantum processors, just basic programming and mechanical parts. Robert walked over to examine it. "This is brilliant. Modern maintenance bots would have broken down centuries ago, but this could probably still work." James accessed more of the archives, revealing the fleet's true purpose. "Our ancestors knew that relying too heavily on advanced technology was dangerous. They believed that someday we might face an enemy that could counter our best weapons, so they kept these ships as a backup plan." The recording showed test footage of the fleet's weapons. Rail guns firing massive slugs that could punch through any known material. Nuclear missiles designed to detonate in complex patterns to overwhelm enemy defenses. Point defense systems that used simple lead shotgun-style spreads to intercept incoming threats. "Look at these power systems," Robert said, examining the engine schematics. "Nuclear fusion drives, mechanical backup systems, chemical rockets for emergency maneuvering. They built these ships to survive anything." James nodded. "And now we need them more than ever." He turned to the team. "The swarm is less than a week away from reaching the core systems. We have until then to wake up this fleet." The engineers spread out through the ship, beginning their work. As James watched them, He realized that humanity's greatest achievement wasn't building these ships, it was having the wisdom to keep them. In their rush to advance, the galaxy had forgotten that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. The ancient fleet was about to teach that lesson again. And this time, nobody was laughing. 2 days into the reactivation process, alarms blared across the ancient command ship. James rushed to the bridge, where Robert was staring at a display screen with wide eyes. "We picked up a distress signal," Robert said, his voice shaking. "The swarm just destroyed our forward defense line. They're moving faster than we thought. We have 3 days at most, not a week." Around them, engineers worked frantically to bring the old systems online. The massive ship had begun to wake up, its corridors now dimly lit by emergency power. The low hum of machinery filled the air as ancient systems stirred to life. "Show me the battle footage," James ordered. The screen displayed the latest encounter with the swarm. Modern Council ships fired their advanced energy weapons, beautiful beams of light that the swarm's ships simply absorbed. Then came the shocking part. A Council ship rammed into a swarm vessel in a desperate move. "Stop. Replay that last part," James said suddenly. Robert rewound the footage. The Council ship's physical impact had actually damaged the swarm vessel. It wasn't much, but it was the first real damage they'd seen inflicted on the enemy. "Don't you see?" James turned to the team. "Their defenses are specialized against energy weapons. They can absorb or deflect any energy attack, but they're vulnerable to physical impacts. Just like we thought." Representative Green's hologram appeared on the bridge. "Ambassador Wilson, please tell me you have good news. We just lost another sector." Instead of answering directly, James showed him the battle footage. "Look at the moment of impact. Their shields couldn't stop physical damage. Now imagine instead of one accidental collision, we hit them with thousands of kinetic rounds per minute. Imagine nuclear detonations that release their energy in all directions, not in focused beams." Green's expression changed as understanding dawned. "The ancient fleet's weapons." "Exactly," James said. "They don't use energy weapons at all. Railed guns, physical missiles, nuclear warheads. Everything is kinetic or explosive. The swarm's defenses aren't designed to stop these kinds of attacks because nobody uses them anymore." Robert called out from his station. "James, you need to see this." He had accessed more of the ship's archives. "Look at the fleet's combat doctrine. These ships were designed to fight in close formation, overlapping their point defense systems. They're meant to create zones of such dense physical firepower that nothing could get through. Like a wall of steel and explosions," James mused. "No fancy targeting systems, no complex energy matrices, just overwhelming physical force." The engineers reported their findings from around the ship. The rail guns were intact, their simple electromagnetic systems still functional. The missile bays were sealed and preserved, their warheads stable. The armor was barely scratched by centuries in space. "But can they fight?" Green asked. "After all this time?" James walked to the main viewport, looking out at the rest of the fleet. These ships were built to last centuries without maintenance. Everything vital has backups. Everything complex has a simple mechanical override. The real question is, can we crew them in time? "About that," Robert interrupted, pointing to another screen. "Look what I found in the lower decks." The screen showed rows of training simulators. These ships were designed to be operated with minimal crews. Most systems are automated, but not with AI. With simple, reliable mechanical computers, a fraction of our normal crew complement could fly these ships. James turned back to Green's hologram. "Get me every naval officer you can spare. We'll start training them immediately on these simulators. The systems are simple enough that they can learn the basics in days." "And if this doesn't work?" Green asked quietly. "Then we'll have tried everything," James replied. "But I believe it will work. Our ancestors built these ships to save us. They just didn't know it would take 2,000 years." As if in response to his words, More systems came online throughout the ship. Lights flickered to full power, and the deep thrum of the main engines began to build. In the distance, the swarm was coming, but for the first time since the crisis began, the galaxy had hope. The ancient fleet was awakening, and with it, humanity's greatest achievement was about to face its greatest test. The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Captain Bill, a veteran of the Council's Navy, stood beside James on the bridge of the ancient command ship, now designated Thunder One. Around them, crews worked to master the old but reliable systems. "It's amazing," Bill said, running his hands over the manual controls. "Everything just works. No neural interfaces, no AI assistance, just buttons and levers that do exactly what they're supposed to do." James nodded, watching as another group of ships lit up in the fleet. One by one, the massive vessels were coming back to life. The maintenance robots, simple and reliable, had kept them in surprisingly good condition over the centuries. Main guns operational on sectors 7 through 12. Robert's voice called out from his station. He had hardly slept, too excited by each new discovery. "The electromagnetic coils are perfect. These rail guns could shoot a metal slug clean through a moon." The ship shuddered as they test-fired one of the smaller weapons. A chunk of metal accelerated to near-light speed shot into empty space, perfectly visible on their tracking systems. No energy beam, no complex plasma formation, just pure kinetic force. "Load the training scenario again," Bill ordered. The bridge crew scrambled to their stations. They had been running simulations constantly, learning to work with the ancient technology. The younger officers had struggled at first, too used to letting computers do the work. But the older ones adapted quickly, appreciating the direct control these systems offered. An alert sounded throughout the ship. Representative Green's hologram appeared, his face grim. "The swarm has broken through the last defense line. They'll reach the core worlds in 24 hours. How many ships do we have ready?" James asked, turning to Robert. 812 fully operational, Robert replied. "Another 1,000 can fight but aren't at full capacity. The rest." He shook his head. "We need more time." "We go with what we have," Bill decided. "Better to fight with some than wait and have none." The crews had discovered more advantages of the ancient fleet. The thick armor and simple systems were highly resistant to the electronic warfare that had crippled modern ships. Without complex computers to hack or delicate quantum systems to disrupt, these vessels were nearly impossible to disable remotely. "Test fire the missile arrays," Bill ordered. They watched as a spread of conventional missiles launched from the ship's side. Each one carried no exotic energy weapons or complex guidance systems, just high explosives and simple tracking devices. "Look at this," Robert called everyone's attention to his screen. "The missile's guidance systems are hardened against interference. They're practically immune to jamming because they use old radio frequencies that nobody monitors anymore." James smiled. Their ancestors had built these ships to be survivors, to keep fighting no matter what. The crews were learning that sometimes the best solution wasn't the most advanced one. It was the one that simply worked. "All operational ships, report in," Bill commanded. The communications officer, using a simple radio system instead of quantum entanglement, began receiving responses. Hundreds of ships, each one a massive fortress of metal and firepower, checked in one by one. "Fleet formation is ready," the officer reported. All ships showing green on weapons and engines. James looked out at the assembled fleet. The ships were ugly by modern standards. No sleek lines or glowing energy fields. Just brutal, functional designs made to survive and deal damage. Their dark hulls seemed to absorb the starlight, broken only by the glow of their engine ports and the massive gun barrels protruding from their sides. "Send word to the Council," James ordered. "The ancient fleet is ready. We'll meet the swarm at the edge of the core systems." As the message was sent, James thought about how far they'd come. Just days ago, these ships had been considered relics, worthy only of mockery. Now they were the galaxy's last hope. All hands to battle stations. Bill's voice rang through the ship. This is not a drill. We launch in 1 hour. The ancient engines roared to life, their nuclear fire pushing against the darkness of space. Humanity's greatest achievement was going to war, and the galaxy was about to learn why you should never laugh at human engineering. Swarm vessels detected. The radar operator shouted. 3,000 ships approaching from Sector 7. Thunder One's bridge was tense but focused. James and Bill watched as the enemy fleet appeared on their screens, moving in their signature chaotic pattern. The ancient fleet held its formation, 800 ships arranged in overlapping defensive positions. All ships, maintain formation, Bill commanded. Remember your training. Wait for them to enter optimal range. The swarm ships moved closer, their black hulls reflecting no light. They had destroyed everything in their path, using weapons that turned modern defenses useless. But they had never faced anything like this before. They're entering missile range, Robert reported from his station. 2 million kilometers and closing. Bill nodded to James. Time to show them what primitive technology can do. All ships, launch missile spread alpha, James ordered. Full saturation pattern. The ancient fleet responded as one. Thousands of missile tubes opened, and a wave of nuclear warheads burst forth. The missiles were simple compared to modern weapons. No energy beams, no quantum warheads, just pure atomic fire waiting to be unleashed. The swarm reacted as expected, their energy shields flaring to life. But these weren't energy weapons they could absorb. The first wave of nuclear missiles detonated, creating a sphere of destruction that rippled through space. Direct hits confirmed, Robert shouted. Their shields couldn't stop the blast waves. We've damaged at least 30 ships. The swarm formation broke apart, trying to adapt to this unexpected threat. They had never faced weapons like these, had no defense against the simple brutality of nuclear explosions. They're charging their main weapons, the tactical officer reported. Energy buildup detected. Braced for enemy fire, Bill commanded. All ships, activate point defense systems. The swarm fired, their advanced energy weapons lancing out across space. But instead of the easy victories they were used to, they found something different. The ancient fleet's thick armor absorbed hits that would have vaporized modern ships. What damage was done was superficial, failing to penetrate the meter's thick metal plating. Range is optimal for main guns, Robert announced. Rail guns charged and ready. All ships, open fire, James ordered. Full broadside. The ancient fleet's main weapons roared to life. Thousands of rail guns fired simultaneously, launching massive metal slugs at near-light speed. There was no fancy energy beam to be absorbed or deflected, just pure kinetic force that tore through the swarm's supposedly impenetrable defenses. Multiple confirmed kills. The tactical officer reported excitedly. Their shields are useless against kinetic impacts. The battle became a brutal exchange of fire. The swarm's energy weapons flashed harmlessly against thick armor, while humanity's ancient weapons wreaked havoc among their ranks. Nuclear fires bloomed in space as more missiles found their marks, while railgun slugs pierced swarm ships from end to end. They're trying to flank us, Bill observed, just like in the simulations. Activate secondary batteries, James commanded. Close-range defensive pattern. As swarm ships tried to get close, they met walls of lead and steel. Point defense guns filled space with simple metal projectiles, creating zones of death that nothing could pass through safely. The ancient fleet's formation held firm, each ship protecting its neighbors with overlapping fields of fire. Enemy fleet is at 60% strength and falling, Robert reported. They're beginning to retreat. The bridge crew watched in amazement as the mighty swarm, terror of the galaxy, turned and fled from their primitive weapons. The ancient fleet's guns continued firing, pursuing the retreating enemy with relentless volleys of missiles and rail gunfire. Send word to the council, James said, allowing himself a small smile. The swarm can be beaten, and tell them how we did it, with technology they thought was obsolete. As the last swarm ships disappeared into deep space, the ancient fleet stood victorious. Their hulls were scared but intact, their simple systems still functioning perfectly. They had proved that humanity's engineering wisdom from 2,000 years ago was still potent. Damage report, Bill asked. Minor damage to outer armor layers, Robert replied. No ships lost. These old boats can really take a beating. The victory was more than just a military success. It was a lesson to the entire galaxy. Sometimes the old ways were the... 1 month after the battle, the Galactic Council chamber was packed. This time, there was no laughter, only respect. James stood at the central podium, surrounded by holograms showing the ancient fleet's victory over the swarm. The battle changed everything, James explained to the assembled representatives. Not just our victory, but how we achieved it. We learned that newer isn't always better. Representative Green, who had once mocked the primitive ships, now stood to address the council. We propose a complete review of our military technology. The ancient fleet showed us that we've become too dependent on advanced systems that can be countered. We need to combine the old with the new. Engineers from various species were already studying the ancient ships. They marveled at the simple yet effective designs, the redundant systems, the robust construction that had survived 2,000 years in space. Look at this, Robert said, showing the council the latest designs. On the main display, a new type of warship appeared. It combined modern quantum drives with thick armor and rail guns. Energy weapons sat alongside missile tubes. It was a hybrid of technologies, taking the best from both eras. We're calling it the Legacy class, Bill explained from his position near the display. Modern speed and sensors, but with the durability and firepower of the ancient fleet. The first ships will be ready for trials next month. The council members nodded in approval. The swarm's attack had taught them a hard lesson about overconfidence in advanced technology. Now, shipyards across the galaxy were building vessels that carried both energy weapons and kinetic armaments. But the ancient fleet taught us more than just military lessons, James continued. It showed us the value of building things to last. Our ancestors didn't just build ships. They built a legacy that saved us 2,000 years later. He gestured to another hologram, showing the ancient command ship, Thunder One. This ship and its fleet will be preserved as a monument. A reminder that sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution. That durability matters more than sophistication. The maintenance robots still worked tirelessly on the ancient ships, their simple designs outlasting countless generations of more advanced machines. Engineers studied them too, learning from their reliable mechanics and basic but effective programming. We've also discovered something interesting, Robert added, bringing up new data. The swarm hasn't been seen since their defeat. Our analysis suggests they were designed specifically to counter energy weapons. They never expected to face physical armaments because everyone had abandoned them centuries ago. The council chamber was quiet as they absorbed this information. Their drive for advancement had nearly been their downfall. If humans hadn't preserved their ancient fleet, if they hadn't remembered their old ways of war, the galaxy might have fallen. From this day forward, Green announced, no technology will be considered obsolete simply because it's old. Every council race will maintain a reserve of older, proven systems alongside their advanced equipment. We will not make the same mistake twice. James walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. In the distance, he could see the shipyards where the new Legacy-class vessels were under construction. They represented the best of both worlds, modern science combined with ancient wisdom. Our ancestors built those ships because they believed in being prepared, James said, turning back to the council. They didn't know what threat would come, but they knew something would. So they built ships that would last, ships that would be ready when needed. The council session ended with a unanimous vote to establish the Heritage Defense Initiative. Its purpose was to preserve and maintain older technologies alongside new developments, ensuring the galaxy would never again be vulnerable to an enemy that could counter their most advanced weapons. As James left the chamber, he passed a group of young officers studying diagrams of the ancient fleet. They weren't laughing at the primitive designs anymore. Instead, they were learning from them, understanding that true advancement meant building on the past, not abandoning it. The ancient fleet had done more than save the galaxy. It had taught it humility. And somewhere, James liked to think, the engineers who built those ships 2,000 years ago were smiling, knowing their work had finally served its purpose.